Happy politics, and welcome to what I know is your favorite BC politics podcast. This is BC Poly Hot Stove. I'm Maclean K. That is my name, and my title is the editor-in-chief of the Orca. What a great start. I'm joined in a socially distant manner by...
It's Jordan Bateman, VP Comms for the Independent Contractors and Business Association. Maclean, in fairness, we kept you up late last night to almost 10 o'clock, so...
Well past my bedtime. And still, you'd think that my name and title be one of those things that I could expect to just sail past, but no, not today. Jordan, you're of course referring to last night we had, you hosted a Twitter space after the first BC Liberal leadership debate. It was the first time I have contributed and participated in a Twitter space in any way, to be honest, other than listening for 30 seconds to a few in the federal election. I thought it went really well.
Yeah, the Twitter space is an interesting little thing. So a while back, there was an app called Clubhouse that launched, and it was really like talk radio. You could put little groups together. The problem for Clubhouse is they had to build their following from scratch. So you'd go in there and you'd have two friends to start with, and you're like, well, those two aren't talking, so how am I going to find anything? Twitter saw the good stuff they did, stole it, put it on Twitter Spaces, and like you, I went in and out of several federal election debates. Or discussions. Had never really hosted one. I hadn't hosted one. But man, I thought it was the perfect way to cap off the BC Liberal leadership debate, which I know we're going to get into in detail here. Yep. And just want to say especially thank you to Mike Klassen, who stepped in early on to help us co-host as we were fighting our feet. To some of the candidates who came on, Mike Lee, Val Litwin, Gavin Dew, and then the great Shirley Bond popped in, the interim leader. And I don't know. It felt good. It was like 120 political nerds talking about political stuff after a political debate. It was the perfect post-game show for the BC Liberal debate.
Yeah, totally different than this show, which is two political nerds talking politics. But exactly. Other than that, completely separate, totally different. And if you're out there and you're considering holding a Twitter space, free advice: don't do it off your desktop Twitter app because that doesn't work.
No.
As I learned to my detriment last night, it's got to be on your phone. I had no idea.
Honestly, I didn't either until I tried to set it up, and then couldn't find it on my laptop, and then realized did a quick Google and discovered it was phone only. But it's a good technology, and I think a lot of us, for a lot of the BC Poly folks, might be the first time they ever tried it. I did see a couple of NDP MLAs sneak into our club, into our space.
Well, that's a good thing. They're always welcome.
Yeah, I'm sure they were taking copious notes. Anyways, but I think you'll see more and more of these. And just a thank you especially to Stephen Taylor from the Conservative Party of Canada, who was one of the first people I saw do this, and it gave me some good feedback and how to make it even better next time. So yeah, it was good.
Fair enough. What we were discussing last night was obviously the debate that just happened. It was last night. It was 90 minutes. There was, you know what? I want to start right off the top with when I asked the party last week who was moderating the debate. That was, I will admit, the first time I had ever heard of Mazar Tang. He did a good job, I thought. I mean, the way you put it last night in the Twitter space, I think was perfect. Is that he never became the story. He handled things fairly well, and he was personable without being the star of the show, which is what you want in a moderator.
Yeah, no, exactly. He didn't offend Quebec, which is always good starting.
Which is hard to avoid doing these days.
I thought the format of it was good. There, the candidates had some questions from members that they answered sort of 1 minute each, and then they had a few chances where they could challenge each other, and then they had little challenge cards. I think that really meant that, as the moderator never felt like he had to step in and correct anyone. Yeah. Like, oh, you've made a terrible factual error there, and which is my least favorite thing that moderators do. I'm there to vote for candidates. Let the candidates correct each other, and if they can't, that actually tells me more about the candidate who doesn't correct than the one who got away with the fib. So yeah, he was not part of the story. Maz does work with Daily Hive. I've been on his podcast before. I can do other podcasts too, Maclean. Not like to see you. And all around good person. And yeah, it was a good fit for that. So we'll see. I don't know when the next one is scheduled or how many they actually have planned between now and February, but I imagine we're going to see at least 2 or 3 more.
I know they're planning on doing several more. I don't know that there is a number defined beyond several. And I don't know that there is a scheduled date. I think with COVID, I think one thing they've learned is there's really no point making long-term plans. Just sort of go with what you can do on a day-to-day basis. And this one was delayed, was it not? Because they didn't want to conflict with the federal election, which only made sense.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I don't think anyone lost the debate. No one came
No.
off that stage and with their candidacy in flames. I do think some showed stronger than others. I think some showed aspects of their personality we haven't seen in the campaign up until now. So we can break it all down as we go here.
Yeah. So, what do you want to do? Sort of general thoughts, or do you want to go through candidate by candidate? I mean, you kind of let off with general thoughts there. I would agree. I don't think there is whenever there's a political debate, we've been sort of couched, and we've learned to look for a winner, and we're always looking for that knockout blow, which almost never happens. Like, it's actually very rare. There's one or two every 10 years, but that's what we've been trained to expect in every debate. And once again, that did not happen. It's even less likely to happen in a party debate because, they all are eventually going to have to work with each other again. But yeah, you're right. I don't think there was an obvious winner or loser last night.
No, I agree. I sat down with my little bottle of kombucha. I was expecting kumbaya, and it was much feistier than I anticipated. I mean, you and I beforehand talked about what's the value in going after each other at this point. Probably none yet. This is an introduction. Get your feet wet. Nope, they went after Falcon from the start. The 5 candidates in, I guess, what you call the second tier, if you think that Kevin Falcon is leading the race, which it's very clear those 5 think Kevin Falcon is leading the race based on their tactics. It started, Ellis Ross had a line in his opening about, we can't focus on the bridges we built in the past. We got to look forward. Michael Lee, basically, I was here and this guy wasn't. Gavin Dew, probably the most aggressive against Kevin. Val even had a shot in there. Maybe we take it candidate by candidate and maybe we start with Falcon. But that was my perception.
Yeah.
Feistier than I expected.
Yeah. I mean, that's the point I made last night in the Twitter space, was that if you're not privy to membership numbers and how the campaigns are doing in terms of, their events and attendances and all these things, if you're not an insider and you don't know the metrics, we've talked about this before. It's one thing to say that Kevin Falcon is the front runner or the favorite, but I mean, just saying it doesn't make it so. Well, last night, the amount of attention that he received from the other candidates kind of indicated that, yes, he is the front runner. He is the presumed favorite. That is how front runners and favorites are treated in debates. And so it was pretty glaringly obvious. I mean, we just said there were no winners and losers in this debate. There's no question that Falcon, took the most shots. I almost said hits, but he definitely had the most number of people, focusing on him and trying to, knock him down a peg or two.
Yeah. I did have a few Falcons folks DM me and a little bit worried and, why are they being so hard on him, blah, blah. Look, he's been out of politics 10 years. Yeah. He doesn't have the same depth of relationship with those folks as he would have had with the folks he ran against in 2011. He hasn't been, he's been helpful to the BC Liberal Party. Certainly tried his best to prop up Andrew Wilkinson as best he could as far as being supportive. But he wasn't in the trenches with them, knocking doors day to day and, dealing with prepping for question period and all that. So he's always going to have that little bit of removal from it. The question isn't, as we've seen these preferential ballots, it's tough to be the front runner because you basically have to be at 47, 48% or more on the first ballot. Because then the other groups start kind of folding into each other, and very few of those votes usually go over to the front runner. However, the theory on that is you do need someone within that group to actually start to rise to the top. Who is the Aaron O'Toole or the Andrew Wilkinson, who are making the savvy deals, who are communicating well enough in order to pick up those lower tier votes. I'm not sure we've seen that person emerge yet. My suspicion is it might be Ellis Ross, but it's still very early days as far as those 5. So it's almost like 2 races going on. The race for Kevin to try to get to 50% plus 1 on the first ballot. And then the other 5 kind of, trying to hold them from getting there, but at the same time also making sure that they're the one that survives the 5 of them. So that was clearly evident in a lot of this discussion. The 5 did not pick on each other much, if at all. In fact, there was some real softball questions,
Yeah.
Val Litwin's, tell me, Renee, how can we attract more women to the party, right? That's perfect, nice softball right down the middle of the plate. So, Kevin, my point to his supporters was look, better he gets his rust off now. he's got, he's a very competitive guy, so I think this will actually get him motivated. I bet you we see a different Kevin Falcon in the next one. I don't think he was expecting the feistiness. He won't be caught off guard a second time. And he'll come in next time, and my belief is he'll talk more about John Horgan than the other 5 people on the stage. And that'd be my recommendation to him at least.
Yeah, I would agree. He did seem to be, I don't want to say unprepared, not unprepared, but caught off guard. I would expect that he probably felt the same way that, well, it sounds like you and I did, and that last night would be a lot more gentle. But it wasn't from his point of view. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he reacts in the next one. And in fact, if the next debate plays out the same way, it may not. It'll depend on format and what questions get asked. The funny thing is, he didn't get a lot of chances to sort of proactively drive points. He got to ask, I think, one question, and he got to respond to audience questions. But that format, when you're playing defense as much as he was last night, that's what he was doing. He kind of had to play defense a little bit.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And we talked about how, it always gets asked of people who aren't within caucus, will you run if you don't win?
Yeah.
And, the easy answer is always, yeah, of course I will. And then, ghost after the leadership vote, right? But, Kevin wants to be authentic and wants to, be truthful. And he's like, well, I'm running to be leader. We'll see where we're at in 2024. Frankly, he'd have to feel the love if he didn't win. He'd have to feel the love from the new leader in order to want to run. It's perfectly valid. But that did trip him up. His comments to Christy Clark from 2011 were brought up, quoted verbatim by Gavin Dew, who brought the receipts, and it's going to be a problem. It's always hard for politicians when you get hoisted upon your own petard, as they say.
Yeah, and 10 years later too. So you're right. I think that the easiest thing to do in that situation is just say yes. You have every intention of running. You're there. You're in there with a real commitment. And as I said last night, if life gets in the way between now and then, fine. These things happen. And if he loses the leadership campaign, it's not going to be an issue whether he runs or not anyway. So it's just, I would have just said yes. It would have shortchanged much of what happened afterward.
Yeah. Oh, wow. He did fine. He survived it. It was by no means like he didn't take a beating or anything like that.
No.
He was caught off a little off guard. And as I said, my suspicion is next time around he'll have better answers for some of those questions.
Now, we started with Falcon because he is the presumed favorite. The much more interesting question, especially for right now, is who would you say is number 2 right now, currently, and who should we talk about next? There are 2 schools of thought here. I've heard arguments for Michael Lee being in that position, and I've heard arguments for Ellis Ross being in that position. And again, not being privy to things like membership numbers, I don't know.
I'm not sure how much polling is actually going on of the membership, but I would say Ellis Ross is probably in second place at this point.
Fair enough.
And he had a classic Ellis Ross kind of night. Anyone watching that would be like, oh, this guy will, he's very authentic. He speaks his truth. He's not ashamed of it. He can say things, as you've mentioned before, that other folks can't say. He gets a certain level of respect from the other candidates. He's that straight talking, shoot from the lip leader. I thought his best line was, "I'm not a politician, I'm a leader." Mentioned
that is a good line.
Mentioned Kitimat too many times. But he's nervous. You bridge back to like we've all been in situations in public. You bridge back to your core message, what you know the best in those moments of nerves. But I thought Ellis performed well.
Yeah, I would agree. 2 interesting anecdotes last night is if you followed Shannon Waters' Twitter feed, she declared the winner of last night's debate to be Ellis Ross's tie, which we learned from Ellis later is actually a photo collage of his family, which is one of those, like, it's a nice touch. Also, I heard this from one other person is that, the other candidates were, I assume, probably, in the middle of last minute debate prep. Ellis Ross was spotted shopping in the Bay just an hour and a half or so before the debate, which is, when someone texted me this, I was just like, this is actually not surprising. That story kind of checks out. He is very much he stands alone. He's in that he's unique. I think I said this last night, and this word gets used a lot in politics, but Ellis Ross is genuinely unique. Your points about bringing up Kitimat probably one too many times are well taken, and that your average voter in Burnaby or Vancouver hopefully knows where Kitimat is, but probably hasn't been there. In fact, almost certainly hasn't been there. And so it is a story worth telling, but you can only tell it so many times because it is just, from most people's point of view in this province, a story that they'll never see. Yeah. So I'm not sure what my advice would be to him there. I guess, bridge away from it more often. But at the same time, I mean, that is where he built his reputation. And in an election where, Indigenous issues will probably be more prominent than any other election in BC history, it's a story worth telling as well.
Yeah, the Kitimat issue is this. It's okay for him to talk about Kitimat, and he should, because that's part of his record, but he needs to then bridge it into what does it mean for suburban BC, what does it mean for urban BC? And, if he bridges it into, and with those, this big boom in Kitimat has come growth challenges, and we met it by doing X, Y, and Z. And I think that there's a model there for this. Or, we talk about, UNDRIP and Indigenous rights all over the province. But what we really need to do is find ways to help them create wealth, steward wealth, and go forward. Like, there's ways to bridge it. He just would stop at Kitimat. Well, I did in Kitimat. Okay, I follow politics pretty closely. I love BC. I've never been to Kitimat. I'm sorry. I love LNG Canada, and I read the paper, so I get what he's saying, but at the same time, he needs to actually spell it out for folks. Like, we did this, and the result of this, the result of the economic prosperity, which frankly, Christy Clark championed, and didn't seem to resonate in 2017. But the result was more housing, more services, better healthcare, better what are the outcomes of that? And we can do the same for your community, if it's depressed or struggling. He just needs to bridge it from Kitimat to the rest of BC.
That's good advice, I think. From Ellis Ross, I think Michael Lee's kind of the obvious next person to talk about here. He kind of had and probably because he spoke very first, he had the first sort of quiet shot at Kevin Falcon in his opening remarks. It's clear that he sees himself, and in fact, I mean, I've been told this by people on his team before, he sees this as, he will emerge as the clear alternative to Kevin Falcon in this race. That's how he's positioning himself. And, he did this as recently as a couple of years ago, and as you put it last night, his message then, we need to broaden our appeal. The party needs to grow in the demographics and communities that are growing the fastest in BC. I mean, whether or not he won that race, that message should have been heeded, and hopefully it will be now, whether or not he is the new leader of the party.
Yeah, I mean, he should go back to that and say, look, I was the voice in the wilderness in 2017 when everyone else on stage was so excited and worried about becoming the next premier because at any moment, the Green NDP coalition was going to collapse. I was the voice in the wilderness saying, guys, forget about that. The problem is we've gone from this vote share to this vote share to this vote. We've lost vote share every election since 2001, and we've got to reverse that trend. He was the prophet who was, proclaiming what was going on there. So I think he needs to bridge back to that. I mean, he's very polished, very thoughtful guy. He's not a firebrand. He's not going to stir hearts and emotions like maybe Ellis can. And that is a bit of a hurdle for a party. Party leaderships often swing back and forth on the pendulum. Like we had we had Gordon Wilson, who was sort of shoot from the lip, fiery guy, scrappy. And then you had Gordon Campbell, who was, the technocrat, detailed policy positions on everything, detailed policy about detailed policy and how you come to detailed policy and didn't really connect with people in the same way that, Wilson did. And then we swung over to Christy Clark, who was like, policy, psh, let's, let's hang with the people. And, it was very, frankly, the most gifted retail politician that we may have seen in BC since W.A.C. Bennett days, or Vander Zalm at the height of his powers. Christie, and then came back to Andrew Wilkinson, smartest guy in the room, but, never emotionally connected with anyone in any substantive way. And now you're like, Michael Lee's hoping, can we just come to the little bit over here where, thoughtful, reasonable, smart guy? And, the Ellis Rosses of the world are like, nope, let's go over here. So the pendulum swings. Michael's on the wrong side of the pendulum. in this group, he certainly comes off as one of the most accomplished, one of the most polished, one of the most thoughtful speakers, smartest guy, maybe in that room. I don't know. So that'll be a challenge to overcome with the membership.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think in the next debate, if I was advising Michael Lee, be lean into the fact that he is a Vancouver MLA. Because what we're all talking about here is we need to win in urban BC, guys. I have, and I'm happy to share my experiences, but like we need more people like me rather explicitly, and so yeah, that's where I would expect he will go with that. Last night, you and I had a quick phone call after the Twitter space, and you made an interesting comparison. Is that the politician in BC who might be the best comparable to Michael Lee, and he won't like this, is Adrian Dix, in that he is a similarly intelligent, verbose person who does best in settings when he can sort of expand on his thoughts and use words like a needle uses thread. But it sometimes is harder when you have to compress a really excellent 2 or 3 minute thought into 10 or 15 seconds for a soundbite. And so, well, I'm not saying Adrian Dix and Michael Lee are ideologically compatible in any way, shape, or form, but in terms of their presentation, there is some similarity there.
Yeah, you see it in estimates. Michael Lee's estimate debates are usually among the best in the House, always well prepared, uses every word carefully. And Dix is the same way. Think of all the press conferences we've had. Like, he doesn't just blather on. He's very precise in his word choice, sometimes frustratingly so. And it's when, the few times where Adrian has tried to get glib during those press conferences, they always fall flat, right? How many slogans did he try to trot out to compare with, keep calm or be calm, be safe, be kind, whatever. He would always, early on, he would try to trot out his own, and, you could just hear Zussman and McElroy and the rest of British Columbia groaning at his attempts at it. So, yeah, I see a lot of parallels.
It's not a coincidence that Dix has thrived in a setting and a situation where, people wanted that sort of calm, steady hand.
Yeah.
And I think Michael Lee that's what he's wanting to project as well, is that, if and when he is the leader going into the next election, is that would be his pitch. Like, BC needs my calm, steady approach right now. That would be, his selling point. It's what Adrian Dix tried in 2013 and didn't work at the time. But, obviously he's reinvented himself as the health minister. And it's an interesting comparison.
Yeah. One thing about Michael that he needs to talk more about is what is the pathway into Vancouver? Last time, the Wilkinson campaign, every single MLA candidate was, for BC Liberals, was male. Obviously, that is not the way to win seats. Pale, stale, and male is not the great way to go in Vancouver anymore. Michael Lee has a unique view into that. He needs to talk about how to attract women to the party, but not just the party, but women as candidates, how to attract minorities as candidates. If he's got a good story of someone who's involved and you're kind of grooming for a riding, now's the time to bring it out. Like, give us some hope here that there are inroads that can be made into Vancouver. Because ridings like Vancouver Fairview used to be coin flips, right? It wasn't that long ago that under Campbell that was a usually safe, reliable BC Liberal riding. It's not that way anymore. So the only path back to government is to break through in the suburbs, and you've got to be competitive in Vancouver.
Yeah, and be realistic about the situation there. Right after the last election, I went and looked at a pile of ridings. I say a pile, somewhere between 5 and 10 ridings that went BC Liberal in 2013 and went NDP in both, in some cases 2017, but all of them in 2020 now. And the margins of win were the thing that the BC Liberals need to pay attention to. They were previously, as you say, coin flips, but some of these the NDP were winning with as much as 65% of the vote. And so again, it's about being realistic and knowing where the party lies in the suburbs and the urban ridings and taking steps to address it.
Yeah, no, I agree completely.
So we've done 3. Who do you want to tackle next? Part of me, I think it might be Gavin Dew, just because I think of all the candidates who weren't Kevin Falcon, Gavin probably did the best job of bringing attention to himself. He was much discussed in a lot of the coverage this morning, and then it was because he was the most aggressive and he had some of the best lines. Would you agree?
I would agree. Right now you're running to be the leader of the BC Liberal Party and leader of the opposition, and you could argue that Gavin Dew was the one who really understands that the best and came out as like, this is what I could do to John Horgan. Well, I'm going to question Kevin Falcon. I'm not going to shy away from, needling him on his record, pointing out when he's stolen my ideas, like on daycare or childcare. And that is very much what you need in an opposition leader. Like,
yeah.
And certainly in, this era of question period, you've got to be fearless, pointed, ready, sharp with your questions. You could make the argument that he did the best job of that. Now, I've heard, I've seen two kind of schools of thought. Oh, he seemed grumpy or snarky. And then the other one was like, no, he's passionate and fiery. So it's all in the eye of the beholder. I don't think he was over the line on any of his questions. I don't think he was rude in any way. My one piece of advice to him is Gavin's a super smart guy. On several questions, you could see he was kind of looking down, probably looking at notes or key things he wants to say. Gavin, you're too smart for that. Like, throw those away, look to camera, talk to us directly. It just made him seem a little less polished than a Falcon, Val Litwin, a Michael Lee. And so, that's something to improve for the next one. And the thing about Gavin is, I'm sure he will. His team was, is pretty clear on what's going on. So I thought it was a fine night for Gavin. He stood out. That's what you want. My kid's just going through hockey tryouts. We've just wrapped up. The thing we say to him before every game is like, hey, whatever you do, stand out. Like, do something that makes sure everyone, knew you were there. Hopefully positive, but, stand out. Looks like Gavin had the same advice going into this.
Yeah, I would echo your comment about things with notes. It's one thing if you're referencing numbers or a statistic or a specific quote, as happened at one case. But right off the top, when you're just reading here's why I'm the best choice to do this in 1 minute, that is when you want to be focused squarely on your audience who are on the other side of the camera. And you're right. It was the first debate, and I think he will improve. I think with Gavin's approach, and I don't know this, but if I had to guess, is that he wanted to combat the perception that, he's the young guy. He's happy to be there. Being on the stage is a win. And he wanted to say, no, I'm in this to win it. And if that means getting my elbows up, then that's what I'm going to do. Because as you're quite right, the job they're running for is to face off with John Horgan for the next 3 years. And you have to be ready to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Well, let's talk about Renee next and leave Val for last.
Sure. Renee probably went in with, she was in the news last week for all the wrong reasons. And so for her, going there and just sort of presenting herself as a peer and very much on the same level with the other five was probably the goal. And she succeeded at that. There were no flubs. There were no flaws. I thought she presented fairly well.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. Like she... look, it's a debate. So certain questions you're like, like you can see it. Like, I could see that as a leader. And then other questions you're like, ooh, that was a bit of a fumble or a stumble or a bumble, So she's so new to the party, so new to politics. I find her, like, having had interactions with her offline, I can tell you that what you saw from Renee Merrifield behind that podium is very much the Renee Merrifield that we've met, we've seen out there in the real world. She's not putting on a show for anyone. Like, that's who she is. She's, she's thoughtful in that she'll pause for a second and kind of compose her thoughts and then speak them out. I, as someone who, often talks first and thinks later, I appreciate that about her.
Never.
So, it was good. Like, part of this is, I don't think thousands of people were watching this debate. I think on Facebook it got around, close to 900-ish at one point. I'm not sure how many watched through the website, although I'm told the numbers were higher there. So a few thousand members, let's say, watched it. This is a chance. This was the first time that we saw all six together, introduce themselves to the party, and from that point of view, she did well. She very clearly, this is who she is. I think she's someone else who will improve in the next one. There's a lot there. There's more there as well that I think she'll show next time.
Yeah, I think, her biggest win there was the moment that, and I want to get into her answer in just a second, but when Val Litwin used his question to essentially cede the floor to her and just say, we need to grow our appeal with women. There's only one woman on the stage, so we should just ask her what she thinks. And we'll get to Val in a second, but I thought that was a brilliant question and framing for him. That probably should have been her moment to just absolutely crush one out of the park. I know I'm not the target audience there. I'm not being a woman myself, but I didn't feel that it was a home run. I don't think she flubbed it by any stretch of the imagination, but I didn't listen to that answer saying that's it.
Yeah, I actually thought Val's response was probably stronger than her answer. That said, of course, he was prepared ahead of time.
Yes, of course.
Talking points. It's such I was going to say kind question that you're almost unprepared for it. And look, there's no magic theory, magic serum on that question. Like women are not a voting monolith. It's not like we could say, oh, we're going to do $10 a day childcare and magically we will now have 51% of the women voting for us and off we go to become government. Like that's just not how it works, right? Everyone votes for their own reason. It's not a monolith by there's no such thing as 52, 53% of the population. That's just impossible to have that kind of singular thing. So it's a little
as Christy Clark used to put it, it's really insulting to imply that women don't care about the economy. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like that women's issues, as we sometimes define them, are the only thing they care about. Because again, you're talking about 52% of the population. It's it's kind of astonishing, really, if you stop to think about it. And I mean, I think she's right.
Yeah. Well, Joy McPhail used to say, why are there girl ministries and boy ministries? Why are women always minister of education or, minister of social services and the men get to be finance and
She's right.
And she was right. And, it's come a long way in recent years, still not fully there. But, it's not a monolith. Like people vote for a myriad of different reasons. I always go back to W.A.C. Bennett, right? He always had 3 policies in every election, 3 promises. One for the heart, one for the head, one for the pocketbook. And,
that's good.
Makes sense, right? Like that basically breaks down every voter, whether male or female, whether old or young. Like you give them a reason to vote for you with their head, their heart, and their pocketbook. You're going to win most elections.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point that we could probably spend an entire podcast talking about, but there are no monoliths. Mm-hmm. I mean, NDP voters are not a monolith. The voters of Kelowna are not a monolith. In the era of, Facebook micro-targeting, we have to get past the idea of, well, women feel this way. Well, I'm sure some do, and maybe a great many, but that is a huge block of people, potentially the largest single block of people in the province.
Look, there was a Maclean's article a while back, not you, a Maclean's magazine article, a while back, and it was like, here are the people who are leading the anti-vax charge. And they were like late 30s women who generally vote Liberal and generally lived in the 905. And you read this, you're like, no, sorry. It's old guys living in Alberta with shotguns who don't want the vaccine. No, this by percentage was the highest group of vax skeptics, right? It's not a monolith. That is not even a majority view among that age of women, yet it is something that you have to deal with and speak to. So when we talk about suburban voters, same thing. Look, I live in Langley. We're a suburb, obviously, so is Coquitlam. We have very different views on certain things and very different concerns. So, you can't just have a monolithic, this is a suburban strategy, which will now, carry us to victory. If it was that easy, we'd have Prime Minister O'Toole right now.
That's true. I mean, if it's the best single example of this in the whole province, I think, is Langford here in Greater Victoria, which elects reliably John Horgan provincially and Stu Young municipally. And they are not ideologically compatible. They get along very well, which is good. But, I mean, the fact that your average Langford voter votes for Stu Young and John Horgan, I mean, there you go right there.
Yeah, look, if you gave me right now and said, Jordan, pick an MLA and a mayor from the same community to go have a beer with, I would take Horgan and Stewie every day of the week. That would be a fun beer. Forget talking politics or anything like that. It would just be entertaining.
I cannot argue that at all. We kind of touched on Val Litwin in as the question he asked Renee Merrifield about getting women involved in the party. He is very much the newcomer here. He's the first-time politician, at least to my knowledge. And for a lot of party members who were watching the debate, this was probably their introduction to him. They might know his name, but I mean, the CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce is not probably a part of their day-to-day lives. And so, as far as an introduction to people, how did you think he did?
I thought he did very well. Like, Val is very polished, an excellent speaker, looks good on camera, popped off screen. Obviously being a new fresh face is both a advantage and a disadvantage because you don't have the network within the party, but you also don't have any of the baggage of the party of previous decisions. I heard from a lot of folks that, who's this Val Litwin? Let me think about this. We knew him through the BC Chamber of Commerce. I think I've told the story. I remember a few years ago, we first joined ICBA. I first joined ICBA. Chris Gardner had just become president. And we were talking about Val Litwin took over at BC Chamber of Commerce. And he put a lot of time and energy and money into this Mind Reader platform, which was like a constant survey of people and members. They have 30,000 small businesses that are members of different chambers. And so he wanted to make sure that when he spoke to government, that he wasn't just coming in saying, "Oh, I'm president of BC Chamber of Commerce." He was coming in with like, "I'm the president, and I've got 65% of my membership behind me on this topic." And at the time, we were kind of like, "Oh, just make a decision." But as you saw it unfold, it was brilliant, and it gave him a cover, and it gave him the ability to get some substantive public policy changes. So, now I'm thinking about, you mentioned Mind Reader last night, and I'm like, would that actually work in a party context? Could you be constantly surveying your party membership on all sorts of different important topics, and then using that material and those ideas and suggestions as a way to form public policy? Like, it's sort of a more modern way of the policy platform conventions that have become stale and generally ignored by the elected officials. So you have that. Now, look, Val has some bumps. He's never been in politics. I'm not sure how would he be able to stand up to John Horgan across? I'm not sure. I've never really seen him in that kind of antagonistic way. Val ran for the Natural Law Party many years ago as a youngster. That's not disqualifying. I mean, Judy Darcy, former Minister of Mental Health, ran for the Communists, literally the Communists, a party of Canada, and still turned out as an NDP cabinet minister elected. I do wonder, though, natural law, flying yogis. I'm sure there's a great story there. I've never asked Val, but I got to find out what it is. So, there's some issues there. But as far as an introduction, like, this is who I am, very good. I thought his analogy of the operating system, for too long the party has been hitting, install later on a new operating system. I thought that was for a large segment of the population, and certainly younger folks, not that I'm young anymore, but that resonated because every day my Apple Watch goes connective power and update, and every day I'm like, do later. And then months go by and you're like 3 operating systems behind. That was a smart analogy, and that's actually something I think he could build on.
Yeah, it's funny. We're just talking about his comparative lack of experience. I thought that of all the candidates, he was not just the most telegenic, but like easily the most telegenic. And I'm not just talking about, the fact that he's a good looking guy. He's got the right kind of voice. I don't think he ever lost his smile once. He maintains his demeanor the whole time. I talked about last night in the Twitter space, I talked about the Kennedy-Nixon debate from 1960, whatever, where people who just watched on TV thought that John Kennedy won the debate. But if you listened just on radio, which most people did still at the time, they thought Nixon had won. I'm not comparing Val Litwin to either John F. Kennedy or Richard Nixon, but if you were just watching the debate, you weren't paying super close attention to what was being said, and if you knew nothing about the candidates, you might be forgiven for thinking that Val Litwin might be a prohibitive favorite. I mean, he's incredibly well presented. Yeah,
he did well. Now, his policy answers were a little bit flat, but he hasn't been eating, living, and breathing this. He did get the small business question, which was like manna from heaven for a former president of the Chamber of Commerce. I, for one, was just happy to see a small business question since it was completely ignored in the federal election and in most debates. So God bless you, Maz Artang, for making sure that one was in. There's a lot there. And, if I'm thinking of that bottom five, the bottom five is five. It's 5, 6. It's not at the bottom. But if I'm thinking of those non-Falcon five, the ones who I could see with the most growth potential quickly would be Ellis and Val. But we have to see. Like, it's one thing to say it to members and be like, all right, well, I'll make him my second choice. It's another thing, like, is he going out? Is he getting traction with, regular people, muggles, non-political people, and getting them to actually sign up for cards so that he can survive the first couple of votes?
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that I don't have access to, so it's hard to see or even guess what's going on behind the scenes. But I mean, I as far as an introduction to a lot of party members, I thought he did incredibly well last night. I would say this: if Val Litwin does not win this, that whoever does win would be well advised to do what they can to encourage Val to run in the next provincial election, because I think you're quite right. There is a real long-term asset there. And if it's not as leader, then it can certainly be as a leading sort of moderate and telegenic voice in the largest population center in the province.
He's like a better version of Ravi Kahlon. I can say it. Maclean will disavow me, but...
I mean, the point I think you're making is that Ravi Kahlon is also a telegenic, well-spoken.
Don't explain me.
Yes.
Don't explain what I'm saying. I know Ravi watches the show.
Yeah, but I mean, it's that is if he doesn't win, and I mean, I don't think anyone has Val Litwin figured as a favorite to win this. That doesn't mean he can't. Yeah. But that's if I'm Kevin Falcon and if I've won this, one of my very first calls is to Val Litwin saying, like, listen, I want you by my side. Yeah. We need you.
Yeah, smart. Obviously smart guy, good experience, great connections in small business, telegenic, and I pick on Ravi Kahlon, but probably a good fit for that ministry, right? Like. It's not a bad little match. And if you do believe, as some BC Liberals do, and for some reason the entire press gallery, that John Horgan isn't running again, and you also believe the rumors that Mo Sahota is organizing on behalf of Ravi, and that could be a formidable leadership campaign. Ravi Kahlon versus Val Litwin. That's a pretty interesting race there. Contrast. Very similar styles. So, if you believe it. I personally believe Horgan will run again because premiers don't quit willingly.
Speaking of topics we could do an entire show on. You're not wrong. You're not making that up. There are rumblings and rumors that he will not run again in 3 years. He has obviously not said either way, but I will say this. I believe those rumblings and rumors at least to be credible. They're not coming from people who wouldn't know. I think at the very least it's something that he's considering. Whether he does it or not, who knows? Because you're right, the chance to run again and be premier for however long that would be is hard to pass up. But I mean, on the other hand, how many politicians get to leave on their own terms?
Well, there's a reason for that because they all stay too long. So they stay too long because politics, by definition, you have to have a little bit of ego. So, it's chicken or the egg. It's just so rare. Like, we can probably count on one hand the number of premiers, prime ministers who actually have left when they would have been reelected. Maybe Brad Wall, maybe?
Yeah. Ralph Klein. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to remember the circumstances of him leaving. But yeah, you're right. It's very, very few and far between.
Yeah. I mean, I think Klein, look, the NDP hadn't been elected in generations at that point, so it seemed unlikely, but there was definite desire for party renewal.
Yeah. I mean, and how differently would people think of Gordon Campbell if he had not gone into is it 2008 election? 2009 and handed the reins to Colin Hanson or someone like that. I mean, I think BC would remember him differently.
Yeah, but the Olympics were 2010. He had to be premier during the Olympics.
Yeah, no, that's true.
But what would it have said if after the Olympics he'd come out and said, all right, I'm not going to run again in 2013 and, let's go to work and...
Yeah.
Who knows?
There were other items in the news, but I mean, we're going on 45 minutes, so we can
forget it. We've done plenty.
Yeah, and we'll have another monster show next week because we didn't even mention the House is coming back next week. So yes, the legislature will return, and so will things like question period. We'll see what that looks like. Still not in all the way in person sitting from the sounds of things, but who knows.
Well, and Shirley Bond was on our after show last night, and she sounded ready to go. It gave me good hope for this this session. It sounds like they're working on some questions and some themes that they want to bring forward. There's a lot to dissect now in the NDP record, and a lot of it is not as good as perhaps the NDP have been claiming to the media. So there's a lot there. So I was happy to see that as well. By the way, on the Twitter space, we are trying to download it. We think there's a backdoor way. If there is, you'll find it in your Orca podcast feed at some point. So
yes, sorry, I should have mentioned that. And thank you for reminding. Yes, and if you know of a way to do it, please let us know. Because if you listened last night, we haven't tried this before. So yeah, that's we're learning as we go. Until next week's similarly monster show, he's Jordan Bateman. I am Maclean K. This time I got that right. Happy politics.